Hello, thank you for joining me here at Talisa Aquaris. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my top 6 mistakes that I have made with my planted tanks. Number 1 is I have set up tanks and added plants to them without having the proper nutrients for those plants. And what happens when the plants don't have proper nutrients when you first set up a tank, the plants end up dying. Sometimes they come back, like they'll just melt off a lot and then, regrow. But a lot of times they end up dying. And oftentimes, if you add very many plants to a tank, you can lose anywhere from, $20 to $50 just from that mistake alone. That mistake right there has cost me quite a bit of money in plants. What I recommend adding to your substrate so that you have proper nutrients for your plants is aqua soil. I do a layer of aqua soil. I don't know if you can see it very well. It's underneath this sand. So I put a layer of aqua soil and I cap that off with sand, and sometimes I cap the sand off with gravel. And this provides all the nutrients you need for your planted fish tanks. Another mistake I've made is not adding enough plants to the tank. Like you can see, this tank right here does not have near enough plants. That's okay. I'm not trying to add a lot of plants to this tank because it is a goldfish tank and they eat plants. However, this is what you're going for with most of your planted tanks. You can see this tank is very heavily planted. And the reason you don't want to make the mistake of not having enough plants is because you get algae. You can see this tank has algae growing on it. I just set this tank up and it already has algae in it. Father Fish said that if you have algae in a tank, it is because you don't have enough plants in it. If you have enough plants in the tank, algae won't be growing because the plants will eat up all the stuff from the water that would create algae. And I thought that was kind of interesting, and I started looking at my tanks, and this is my most heavily planted tank, and as you can see, there's very little algae on it. There's a little bit right down here, but for the most part, there's no algae in this tank at all. So I'm going to say that theory is true, and he has a lot more experience than me, and I have went and bought more plants that I will be adding to some of these tanks, specifically this one and this one up at the top, and I have some more out in my living room that will also be getting more plants added to them after this video. I just wanted you guys to see what it looks like. Like, most people would look at this tank and think it has a great amount of plants, but compared to this one, it does not. And if you don't want to have to be scrubbing your glass and cleaning up algae, it's great to just add a lot more plants to your tanks. Plus, betta fish love having a lot of plants, and that's mostly what I have. They feel a lot more secure in a heavily planted tank, which means they move around more, they're healthier, they're happier, all that. And the third mistake that I have made is overfeeding. I'm kind of embarrassed to show you guys this tank even, but this is a result of overfeeding. As you can see, the betta fish is doing fine still. There's some cory catfish in there that's doing fine, but I overfed this tank. And that also comes from my fourth mistake, which is overstocking the tank. Do not overstock your tanks when you first set them up. As soon as I set this tank up, I added the betta fish, 2 cory catfish, multiple snails, like some nearite snails and a mystery snail. And then shortly after that, I went and bought a school of 7 blue rasboras. And this was obviously way too many fish for this tank. And I maybe could have gotten away with it if I just fed them less, but I overfed them and I had the tank overstocked. When you have a planted tank like this, it actually starts producing food for the fish. So you only need to feed them 2 or 3 times a week once the tank gets a bit more established. And if you only add a few nano fish to a tank when you first set it up, you don't have to feed them at all for the first. And also, as you can see, this tank does not have enough plants. Now, it's not really growing algae, but there is maybe you could call that an algae bloom in the water. The water is just very cloudy from overfeeding. And over here at this tank, also not enough plants. I'll be adding more plants. You can see there's algae on the plants. The algae is currently dying off, but it's still there. It's still an issue. Another mistake that I've made in the past is I add plastic plants to my tank. So if you're going to do a planted tank, do not add plastic plants. I don't recommend plastic plants. anyway. They release toxins into your water, and it may not kill the fish, but it's certainly not healthy for the fish, and it can damage their delicate fins, and just they're very rough, and they just, you know, they look very fake and tacky. It's really good when you just can set up a complete ecosystem and there's no use for anything fake. I use real rocks, real wood, like driftwood, real plants, and that is very ideal for any fish to just create like what they have come from. As you can see, that's not what I've accomplished with this tank, so I will be adding more plants. I've already added some alder cones there to add more tannins to the water. And I should also add, I am doing water changes on this tank. Like, I'm not just letting it sit here. I'm taking care of the fish, and I'm actively getting rid of this in the water. And the sixth mistake that I have made with my planted tanks is I would add filters. You don't need filters if you have a heavily planted tank such as this one. The filters just filter out stuff from the water that is actually beneficial to the plants and prevent it from becoming a complete ecosystem if you're using a filter. Now, I do recommend a filter for like goldfish or large fish that produce a lot of waste and eat plants, because it would be nearly impossible to have enough plants in the tank to filter the tank because they eat them and because they're large and just prefer more swimming space. So you can see I do have a filter in here with my goldfish. It's not a cartridge filter, it is a sponge filter. But for all of my other tanks that just have like betta fish and like nano fish and, you know, endlers and stuff like that, I do not have filters. It's not necessary. And once the tanks are established, you don't even need to do water changes. They are set up like a complete ecosystem if you have the proper substrate, enough plants, good lighting, you know, all that good stuff. That is the top 6 mistakes I've made with planted tanks. I hope this video was beneficial to you, and thank you for watching.